This is our first annual Sustainability Research Symposium that is a part of Earth Week. I'd like to thank you again for joining us. Our vision when we put this event together was to realize some of the things that we committed to when we launched our new sustainability initiative that's called Sustainable Carolina. And one of those commitments was to try and be sure that we were connecting our activities around sustainability to the research at the university that was going on around sustainability. So this doesn't necessarily mean things that directly inform decision making, but in many cases it does. But what it really means is recognizing the depth and breadth and strength of the research that we have going on at the university and celebrating it in weeks like this, Earth Week. So many of our speakers are here today. You've seen the list. It's an amazing group doing really interesting stuff, and we're extremely grateful to have them all here. Thank you to Melanie Elliott, whose idea this was several months ago. I think it's a great way to really directly connect the research that's going on at our $1.2 billion research enterprise university to the experience that we have as sustainability professionals, and most importantly, to the undergraduate students who are here today to learn more about these things and engage with the speakers. So definitely find the folks who've given their talks. They'd be happy to talk with you. It's all being recorded, so we're going to use the material again as we go forward. And we have a great set of speakers throughout the day. The pattern will be 2 10-minute talks and then some time for questions. And we're going to repeat that pattern 4 or 5 times? 4 times between now and 4 o'clock. Feel free to grab snacks, run to the bathroom if you need to. We won't have any big official breaks, but that'll be the way that we're going to operate. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Kenan Professor Greg Characklis, who is the head of the Center on Financial Risk and Environmental Systems.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for inviting me here today. I direct something called the Center on Financial Risk and Environmental Systems. We've got a cute acronym for it, CoFiRES, make it easy to remember. Financial risk. Hopefully you'll have a better understanding of that risk and the types of solutions that can benefit the environment by the time we're done with this 10 minutes. So what motivates the work that we do? It's this idea that highly variable costs and revenues are disruptive. This is a time series of hydropower revenues over a 65-year period. It ranges from about $800,000 a year at the low end to about $15 million a year. It's a relatively small hydropower facility. The idea is that when you have highly variable revenues like this, it makes it very difficult to plan, very difficult to ensure that you'll be able to meet your debt obligations, very difficult for those that lend you money to be sure that they'll be paid back. And so there's all sorts of challenges associated with it. So in the simplest case, what we're trying to do is reduce some of this low-end risk, this risk of low-end revenues. And so coming up with a management strategy that will perhaps bump up the floor there from 800,000 maybe to 2.5 million, give you some security that you can meet your obligations. This doesn't come for free, of course, so you earn a little bit less in the wet years because we're hydropower dependent here to protect yourself against the dry years. So why do we care about this so much? Well, default or bankruptcy are the worst manifestations of financial risk. If you're a private or a publicly held firm, you're going to be valued at a lower level if you have highly variable costs and revenues. People like certainty. And then there's this issue of the higher costs of financing. Everybody borrows money. Nobody pays cash for things, right? And so whether you borrow that money via loans or via the bond market, the people that lend it to you want to be paid back. And if they're nervous about variability in your costs or revenues over time, they're going to charge you higher interest rates, and that is a big deal. That's a much bigger deal than most of the scientists or engineers realize. There are reasons that interest rates on these sorts of bonds, loans, are divided into hundredths of a percentage point, because when you're talking about hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, that makes a difference. All right, so another reason we're interested in it is that environmental financial risks are growing. This is a representation of billion-dollar disaster events, droughts, wildfires, floods, extreme temperatures, and so forth. And we see them increasing for a couple of reasons. One is that we have increasing assets at risk. Think about the Outer Banks, what they looked like 30 or 40 years ago and what they look like now. Same hurricane hits, the damages are very different, right? And then we have increasing frequency and severity of some of these extreme events as a result of climate change. So this is getting the attention of a lot of different folks. Those of you that have heard of the World Economic Forum, it's where the political leaders, captains of industry get together each year in a beautiful ski resort in Switzerland. And one of the things they do is they rank the impact and likelihood of global risks. And so I don't expect you to be able to read all of these, but as you'd expect, the high impact, high likelihood events, which are up here in the upper right-hand corner, are the ones that we're most worried about. And these include things like natural disasters, water crises, extreme weather events, and failure to adapt or mitigate climate change. So it's gotten an increasing amount of attention from folks within government. There was an executive order from the White House in 2021 wherein the president asked all federal agencies to evaluate their climate-related financial risk and then to begin to develop strategies for managing it. In the private sector, investors, lenders are starting to look at these risks much more carefully than they used to. BlackRock's the biggest asset manager in the world, something like $9 trillion under management. They're talking about climate change and concerns over extreme weather events driving a lot of investment decisions. Matter of fact, for those of you that stay engaged in the news, this has gotten them in trouble with some folks. So what's that mean? It means it's really a good time to be doing the stuff that we're doing. It really has been very gratifying to see our work get picked up in the popular press. It's also been gratifying to see the members of our group go on to bigger and better things in a whole range of areas, ranging from academia to the finance industry, insurance, reinsurance, consulting. And so it's been a very fortuitous place in which to spend our time. All right. So the risks here are driven largely by interaction between systems. And so we focus a lot on these interactions between these boxes, the natural system, the engineered, and the economic financial system. So we've always got variability in the natural system, whether it's precipitation, stream flow, temperature, wind speed, et cetera. Some of that is connected directly to the economic and financial system, but often the engineered system mediates some of these extremes, right? Things like dams and reservoirs, aqueducts, energy generation systems that turn wind and sunshine into electricity. And then there's the connection to the economic and financial system, energy markets, water markets, pricing, conservation rules, environmental regulations, and so forth, all part of this institutional system. And so this cascade eventually trickles down to these measurable financial outcomes. So revenues, costs, net revenues, and that's our objective, to translate all this variability in this natural system into variability in financial outcomes. So the nice part is that there's not a whole lot of people doing research at the interface of all three of these systems. And so we've carved out sort of a unique space for ourselves. All right, so let's get back to this hydropower question. So I told you that there's this cascade of systems. So I want to give you a really quick and dirty example of how we think about these systems. First thing we need to know if we're going to think about hydropower variability is how is hydropower used? Well, in a lot of different regions of the country, it's used as a peaking source. So what you see here is electricity demand over a week in the summertime. And what you see is it rises up in the late afternoon and the early evening when it gets really hot and everybody's got their air conditioner turned on, right? So there's almost a doubling of energy demand in this period of the day. And so the challenge is that sources like nuclear and coal don't ramp up very quickly. And so what we need is some source we can turn on and off without much of a penalty. And so natural gas and hydropower fit the bill there. And if you got hydropower, it's even better because it's a lot cheaper than natural gas. So with that as backdrop, we're trying to figure out how we're going to both characterize all that variability that we saw on that first plot in revenues generated by hydropower and then how we manage it. And so one of the factors that contributes a lot is inflows to the reservoir, right? Makes sense. Water's the fuel that turns the turbines. If we have less water, we have less generation. So really, there's a pretty good match here, about 1 to 1. But we're not interested in generation here. We're interested in revenues. And so if we're interested in revenues, we see that inflows and revenues don't match up quite so well. And that's because the price of electricity varies. And so if we're trying to get an understanding of this risk, and we put seasonal inflows and seasonal revenues on a plot, we see there's a relationship there, but it's not great, right? So seasonal inflows don't capture all the things we need in order to understand what the variability in hydropower revenues. But what a smart graduate student, Jordan Kern, who's now a professor at NC State, figured out is, what does the utility have to do if it doesn't have hydropower? Well, it's got to turn to natural gas. And the cost of that natural gas-based generation is closely tied to the price of natural gas. So he put together an index that combined inflows and natural gas price, and there we have excellent agreement between seasonal revenues and the index, right? So what's this tell us? It tells us two things. It tells us, one, that we have a good understanding of the risk, and two, it gives us some mathematical foundation around which to build a strategy for managing the risk. So this is another representation of hydropower revenues varying over a long period. We've taken that information that we have on both electricity price, natural gas price, and inflows, how they're correlated, to develop a new collar contract, a contract that is going to manage variability in the risk. And so we can take hydropower revenue variability that looks like this and turn it into something that looks like this. Makes it much easier to plan, makes it much easier for creditors to have the kind of confidence that inspires lower interest rates. Lots of potential benefits here. All right, so we do this kind of work in sectors around the country, in a couple places around the world. You're going to hear something about water utilities and some of the risks that they face. The next group coming out of the Environmental Finance Center. Not coincidentally, you're also hear from Hope Thompson as a part of that. Hope did work with CoFiRES for her master's, which was related to flooding. We just had a paper published on that actually showed up in the Well last week. All right, so the final point here is that we can improve environmental quality by reducing financial risk. Too much to go into here other than to just make a few of these statements, but we can encourage greater conservation. We can reduce reliance on physical infrastructure. We can encourage less environmentally damaging activity, and we can increase our use of renewable energy. So these are the people that make it all happen. Wonderful group of graduate students and researchers. We also have a wonderful group of collaborators, both around the university, spread throughout the university, as well as spread throughout the country. And here's a picture of a few of them. And thanks.